Where's the line of what you don't want to share, without giving away something? But how do you decide like what's too much or what's too personal? Do you have a line?
Yeah. So,
or have you ever learned like, oh shoot, I should have done that?
Early in my career. So when my grandmother died, it was very, very hard, and I couldn't talk about her without crying, and I couldn't tell the story and find the humor in what it was. And so like when you're too close to a hurt, or at least when I'm too close to a hurt, there's no place on stage for that, in my opinion. That place is with a therapist or with a loved one or with a counselor. And so, you know, like even when I was going through that miserable divorce, there was no performing that story. You know, I had to find the humor in it. I had to find where I was at fault. I had to find where she was right. I had to find where like, oh, wait a minute, this is why, you know, so, you know, I think that's part of it. Cause I am looking to make art out of the everyday. And I definitely do want to leave people, you know, inspired. Like, oh wait, I went through this miserable thing and I came through it. And I met this other amazing woman, and I met these kids, or I got rejected 160 times, but 161 the book came out, or you know, and you know, I have 2 kids of my own right now, and I'm pretty. It's funny. I'm kind of special with them. I'm not trying to bring them on stage a whole lot, but I want them to know too, and you know, and other kids that I'm working with, like. Nobody has their doing. There's very few people that are born with that skill, whatever it is. And the rest just work super hard. You know, Kobe Bryant, famous stories of he's first to the gym, last out of the gym, you know, and
same with Michael Jordan. Yeah.
Michael Jordan, the same thing. And these are just tall, gifted, amazing people and the hardest working people, you know? So, you know, I think so. If I'm not psychologically able to talk about it without, you know, then I kind of let it go.
And humor kind of works like, you know, the whole pain plus time equals comedy.
Yes.
You know, that I think that variable means something different to people. For sure. Like I know stand-up comics who have lost a friend and gone up on stage that night to work it out. Right. Like therapeutically.
Right. And I understand there's a lot of people that do that, and I get that. As a matter of fact, I love that movie, The Big Sick. Did you see this movie?
Yeah.
And so he's on stage on the worst night of his life, and he's got to perform, and you know, it's a disaster, and whatever's true or not about that, like, you know, in some ways it is a good outlet to have for sure. And that, you know, being really honest in that way, it can be really compelling. Obviously, even the whole Me Too movement, the last, you know, year, 6 months, it's like, wow, somebody is speaking something that's really, really hard to speak with a lot of people. So I don't know. One of the things I have, there's 2 things that I have. One is if I'm doing autobiographical storytelling, my dad is never going to hear this podcast. He can't figure out the internet, right? So, but I want to know if I'm talking about somebody, even my ex-wife, I want them to be able to listen to the story and not be upset.
Right.
I want to honor them. I want to be true, but I also want to honor them. So even my grandmother, who's now been dead for 30 years, I think about her in the audience. What would she say if I'm using her name and her more stories in her memory? Would she be proud of what I'm doing? Yeah. So you know, I did write a show about my mother, who's still alive, thankfully, and hopefully will be for many years as well. But there was the show that I couldn't do if my mother was in the audience. Now I've met a number of people like, I moved out to LA to be a stand-up so I can say whatever I want about my family in Minnesota. They're never going to hear me. I'm gonna throw them under the bus, and they're super funny. Yeah. And that's sad. Like, you're gonna throw your family under the bus, like you know. So you know, I have the show that I might perform if, you know, 20 years from now when my mom passes away, the real story about my mom, you know. So this is really funny. So the show that I wrote for my mom was she says, you can say anything about me as long as it's true. And so I did. And there's some just miserable stories. She would, you know, she had miserable temper, and back in the 70s when you were allowed to hit kids, you know, we got hit all the time. And she's like, that's true, I did that. Like, she would be in the audience like, I hit him with the brush, I hit him with the fucking brush, that was me. You know what I mean? So like, it's fine. She's cool with it, you know? But there's like, so my mom and dad got divorced, and I was like, and then my dad wanted us to live with him. And I said, you know, we were thinking about doing it, and the judge said we could. And my mom says, no, if you say that, they're going to think I was a prostitute, a whore, because back in the 70s, nobody lived, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's weird how people take something, you know? So I feel like for me, like if I'm talking about somebody else, will they be upset about it? So I stopped there. And then, I feel like a politician when I'm in front of kids. Like, how are they gonna react to something? So I need to make sure that I'm, taking care of them. You
don't know what's gonna stick.
I don't. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And when I'm watching people do stuff, I think it's pretty clear who needs to be in therapy and who is trying to entertain us, because now I'm very, very aware. I think about this when I do my own shows. Somebody's going to get in an Uber or a car and maybe get a babysitter and spend $10, $20, $30. Is this worth their life, energy and money, And so, in some ways, there's a place for that kind of really deep stuff that's writing. Maybe there's writing groups or whatever it is. But for me, I feel like if somebody can talk about it without crying about it, if it's that deep, or then I feel that's important. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you ever? I guess probably the last thing, unless you have any other questions. But I was just wondering, have you ever had like a experience where somebody surprised you with, like, wow, that story really touched me, or thank you for talking about me that way, or anything like that, where you got like an unexpectedly nice reaction?
Yeah, so it happens both for adults and for kids. The idea of like, oh, my grandmother is from Mexico or from Guatemala, or she's from wherever she's from, and she's just as fun as your grandmother, and I want to go talk about my grandmother. Mm-hmm. That's something that happens all the time. And also my immigrant story, my dad's immigration story is not so unique. And when somebody sees me talking about all the things that they left, that gives them, sometimes it gives them the memory to talk about it as well. So that's kind of good. And then of course the show that I was doing about breaking up, and, there's various people that were in the middle of a breakup that would come up to me afterwards and say, oh, this is so great for me to hear this at this time, and to see that you got through it, or to hear you speaking about the hurt. That's exactly what I was feeling, so that, when you're connecting in that way, that feels really good to do that, for sure.
It helps to hear somebody articulate some way you're feeling outside your own head.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. And then also the thing that does happen, I mean, there's always people in the audience who are writers in some way. They want to get a children's book published, or they want to do a solo show, and when they hear how hard I worked and how many times I've been rejected, I love that people come up to me and say, oh, I really hope I get to be rejected as many times as you. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm like, good for you. Yes.
That's an attainable goal.
You can do it. I think it's super easy.
Live your dream.
Yeah, I just met somebody the other day, and she says, I have this great children's book idea and this and that. I'm like, oh, great. Have you sent it out? Yeah, I sent it out, but it's already been rejected. I'm like, how many times? She said 2 times. I'm like, okay, great. Just call me in another 98 rejections. Yeah. Because you got a great idea. I love that idea, and you just got to get it in the right hands.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being in the right hands, we've certainly been in the right hands as a storyteller here today. So I want to thank you for coming out. Where can people find out more about you and catch updates on your projects?
My website, Antonio Sacre. My name, antoniosacre.com. On my website right now is the my latest thing that's on TV right now, the KCET story that I was telling. So you can see the whole 13-minute version of that. And then on Twitter, I posted the Car Plays. I'm Antonio Sacre on Twitter as well. There's a link to the Car Plays. Hopefully there'll be an extension and people can see that. And then my album, Off the Wall, is on CD Baby, and that just released yesterday. So if you listen to it, tweet me and let me know what you think about it. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and tell some of my stories here and talk about those things here. So thank you guys.
Great to have you.
Awesome. Right. Well, until next time, thank you for listening to Oh Man, That's Awful here on Radio Titans. I'm Carl Kozlowski.
Kevin Corcoran.
And our sound man,
Dr. David Robinson.
And thanks again to Antonio Sacre. Goodbye.
Bye.